Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Scarberg here with Consolidated Planning Group. We are glad that you are here today. So some of us are attending this webinar, and some will be listening in by podcast. So today's topic, we are talking about the ever popular topic, Medicaid waivers. All states have Medicaid waivers, but today we're talking about Texas Medicaid waivers. So if you're joining in from a podcast perspective, you can get a copy of today's slides by emailing at contact@cpgcares.net or calling 281-690-1177. And that, again, that's 281-690-1177. From a housekeeping perspective, for those attending the webinar, we are in webinar mode today, which means that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're there. And we do invite all of you to put your questions in the chat box today. Today we're going for an hour, so we'll be going from 12 to 1 today. If you're planning your day, you can plan that we will be finished at that time. Today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone will get a copy of today's slides in an email following this meeting today. So just to talk a little bit more about Consolidated Planning Group, we are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We have over 30 years of experience. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We are an advisory and consulting firm, and the clients that we serve are predominantly families who have a loved one with a disability or will have special care needs in the future. People come to us because they need help in figuring out how much money they need to fund a special needs trust for the future care of their loved one. We help people put protection plans in place, lifetime care plans. We do a lot of advocacy in the way of our webinars. We have the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. All of our past webinars live on that YouTube channel. And today we're predominantly talking about Medicaid waivers, which lends itself to other things when it comes to special needs planning. We have webinar topics on every single one of those topics. We have almost 400 webinars on our YouTube channel, and we've tried to really title them in such a manner so you can kind of search for the step that you're on in your planning journey. We have talks on guardianship, special needs trust, SSI, Medicaid, many others, and so you'll want to check that out. And today's recording will live out there after this as well. When it comes to special needs planning, your situation is specialized, and we always recommend that you work with a specialist. And that comes to the financial side of the house and the financial planning, and it also comes to the legal side of the house and legal planning, such as your legal documents, wills, special needs trust, guardianship, other matters that take special care when we have a loved one with a disability. We do recommend that you work with a specialist on your journey. So today, again, what we're talking about today is Medicaid waivers, SSI eligibility, preserving those benefits. Medicaid waivers is almost a buzzword in the special needs community, where we hear Medicaid waivers all the time, and we hear, are you on the interest list? Are you on the waiting list? Those are some of the things that we hear. And some states, the reality of it is, if somebody's listening from another state, all states have Medicaid waivers. Each state calls them something different. They're Medicaid waivers, but each of the waivers will have a specific name or a title. But the point of the Medicaid waivers, I think as families, we know that we need to get on the list. In Texas, we need to get on the list because the list and the waiting list is very long, right? It's a long time before we get services. But sometimes we don't even know exactly what we're getting on the list for. So first things first, I like to start with what are the Medicaid waivers, or what is the point of the Medicaid waivers? So first things first, the point of the Medicaid waivers is to provide home and community-based services for your loved one with a disability, with the idea of keeping them in home and community-based services as opposed to being institutionalized. These waivers provide for services, they provide for therapies, different waivers provide different things. Sometimes parents can be paid as a caregiver for some of these waivers. They will sometimes pay for attendance services or what they call respite services. And the whole idea is that the U.S. understands that caring for a loved one with a disability, there are a lot of expenses that go along with that. And it's in hopes to defray some of the costs so that way your loved one can stay in the community where they belong, where they have friends, where they have community, and live a fulfilling life. Okay. So what we're going to talk about right now is the Texas Medicaid home and community-based waivers. And one thing that you guys have learned along the way is that we love acronyms for everything. So I just wanted to go through some of the names of the waivers that we have here in Texas and also other names that they're called. So we have the Community Living Assistance and Support Services, which is also called CLASS. The Deaf Blind with Multiple Disabilities, also known as DBMD. We have Home and Community-Based Services, which is known as the HCS waiver. We have something called the Texas Home Living Waiver. TXHML is the short name for that. And then we have MDCP, which is the Medically Fragile Dependent Children. The STAR Plus waiver, which is also known as the 1115 demonstration waiver. We have the Youth Empowerment Services waiver, which is called the YES waiver. And then we have the Community First Choice, also known as CFC, okay? So taking, a deeper dive into some of these waivers, first we're going to talk about the CLASS waiver. This is going to give home and community-based support to children and adults with related conditions. There's over 200 quote unquote related conditions like cerebral palsy, spina bifida. The related condition must have occurred prior to the child turning age 22. So over 200, I was just naming a few. It doesn't mean that they have to have CP or spina bifida, but there are a lot of conditions out there, so you'll want to look that up. The deaf, blind, and multiple disabilities. This gives services for children and adults who are deaf, blind, or have a related condition that leads to deaf or blindness and who have another disability. So deaf, blind with another disability is basically what the breakdown is for that. So then we have the Home and Community-Based Service Waiver, HCS. This is going to give services and supports to children and adults with an intellectual disability or a related condition who live with their families in their own homes or small group homes with no more than 4 people. Today, we're going to talk about what the requirements are for qualification for these waivers as well. Not all of the waivers, most of the waivers have a requirement of an intellectual disability, which is generally categorized as an IQ of 70 or below is typically what they're talking about. And it can be 75 and below if they have multiple disabilities. So a lot of the waivers do carry that requirement for an intellectual disability, but I do understand that there are a lot of people out there that have loved ones with a disability that may not have an intellectual disability, but there are some waivers that they can be covered by as well. So now we're going to talk about the STAR Plus. This is the HCBS waiver, the Home and Community-Based Services. This gives services to adults 21 and over to keep them in their community, not in a nursing home or a facility. Services are offered through an MCO, which is also known as a managed care organization. You can get on this list at age 21, and the list isn't very long, okay? Texas Home Living. This is going to give services and children to adults with an intellectual disability or a related condition who live in their own home or their family's home. The Youth Empowerment Service waiver, this is one that a lot of people actually don't even know exists, the YES waiver. It's a 1915C, that's 1915C Medicaid program. And this gives home and community-based services to children under the age of 19 with serious mental, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. In a lot of the counties, there's no wait for this program. This is like a wraparound program. Think about kids, and the primary diagnosis of like mental and emotional difficulties. The primary diagnosis in this example wouldn't be Down syndrome with mental and emotional difficulties. It's really for mental and emotional difficulties. Some kids that fall into this category are maybe some kids that maybe have had some run-ins with the law. Maybe they have been a threat to themselves or others in the past. Maybe they've had some altercations or fights at school or in other environments that have got them in hot water. Some of them are runaways, and it's really broad. And so some of the things that I just mentioned, it isn't just that. You may have a loved one that has severe anxiety and depression, or maybe bipolar, or some of the other, I call it the alphabet soup that comes with mental health challenges. But this is a really good waiver, and a lot of people don't know about it. So when we talk about the home and community-based services, the wraparound program, they have therapy. There is a community support person that works with your child. There is a person that works with the family, and there are additional services that are specifically tailored to the individual and their likes and needs, various therapies. We've seen art therapy, music therapy, equine therapy, all different types of therapies that may be helpful. The Community First Choice waiver, this allows states to provide home and community-based attendance services and supports to Medicaid recipients with disabilities. It helps with activities of daily living, health-related tasks through hands-on assistance, supervision, or cueing. It's serviced to really help an individual learn how to care for themselves. And again, here services are offered through the MCO, the Managed Care Organization. This is really an entitlement. The list isn't very long, typically a year or less for the CFC, Community First Choice waiver. So service is available in all waivers. So here's some examples: adaptive aids, financial management services, supported employment, employment assistance, sometimes minor home modifications, respite care, and services in all but MDCP because it's already included in MDCP. Professional therapies, OT, PT, speech therapy, music, massage, rec, equine, art. Basically, if you can pick it up, there's a therapy for it, and a lot of the therapies are covered. It really does depend on which waiver you have. Some waivers are going to provide more therapy services than others. You can really only have one waiver at a time, and a lot of families are on the interest list for all of the waivers, and they may come up on the list for one waiver first. Like, for instance, they might come up for the class waiver first and be getting the class waiver and have been on the class waiver for a few years, which provides more of the therapy services than, for instance, the HCS waiver. And so when a person comes up for the next waiver, the HCS, you have a choice of keeping the one that you had or switching to the other one. And there's different budgets for different waivers, right? And it's not always that you should switch to the one that you came up on because the budget is bigger. If your child really, really needs a lot of therapies, and the HCS waiver doesn't provide for those therapies, you actually may be better off to stay on the class. And so careful consideration really comes to mind when it comes to deciding to switch. I'm not saying to switch or not to switch. I am saying that it is really important to kind of weigh the options and weigh the benefits and what you might be losing from stepping away from the existing waiver that you might be getting. Some of the other waiver services that are provided are transportation, residential services. We talked about the equine therapy, DayHab. They changed the name on the DayHab last year, and nursing services. So those are some that are really important to a lot of families. So when it comes to the waiver general eligibility, most waivers are for all ages for the exception of MDCP, the YES waiver, and the STAR Plus waiver. So the YES waiver is up to age 19, MDCP is up to 21, STAR Plus starts at age 21. So there is financial eligibility for waivers, and this is a real misnomer that I like to talk to people about, because what I hear all the time is, we don't qualify for Medicaid, so I guess we're never going to qualify for the waivers. And it's true that the Medicaid eligibility, the requirements are quite low, and that, not having more than $2,000 assets in your name is a Medicaid requirement. But when it comes to Medicaid waivers, the Medicaid eligibility is based off of the kids' assets and income, not the parents. And this is a little bit confusing for families because when it comes to SSI, if your child is a minor, it's based off of the parent's income and assets, not the child. Okay, so sometimes people think if they come up on the waiver list and the child is under age 18, that they're not going to get the waiver because they make too much money. They have, they're over the asset limit. And again, that is not true because it is based off of the kid's income and asset, not the parents. Okay, so from the income requirement, and so this isn't the asset requirement. The asset requirement is less than $2,000 in the individual's name. The income requirement is 300% of SSI. So for 2024, the SSI amount is $943 a month. So if we said 300% of $943, the maximum income a person can have and still be eligible for a Medicaid waiver is $2,829 for 2024. This number changes each year. You hear usually in October or November, they announce the COLA increase for SSI, and that's where we get these numbers from. So whatever the SSI number is times 300% is going to be the income limit, okay? So individuals must meet the functional eligibility criteria for the specific waiver. But the key thing to understand here, some of us don't know. A lot of parents are very hopeful and optimistic of the future growth and maturity and where things might be going in the future for their loved one with a disability. And we don't know for sure that they're going to need this waiver in the future, but they might. It's a good idea to go ahead and get on the waiting list. I mean, you can pass. If you come up on the list, you can pass if they're not eligible or if they don't need it, but you can't just get on it, get the waiver because you signed up later because of the long waiting list. The eligibility is not determined until the individual comes to the top of the waiting list. So you don't have to prove eligibility to put yourself on the list. So that is really, really important to know. When a person comes up on the list, a lot of times your local authority, they'll do an assessment. They will determine something called the LON, that is the level of need, and that will also determine what services are available and how much of the budget that you will get for the said waiver that you have qualified for. It jumps on the slides here. So there's two funding paths for waivers. So it's first come, first serve. It's statewide, and the wait can be as long as 17 years. Sometimes we've even heard longer. The whole idea behind it is promoting independence. It prevents or diverts individuals from institutions. It addresses crisis, and it helps individuals move or transition from institutions back into the community. Those are some other examples. So we've been talking about this wait list, and you've heard the interest list, the wait list. How do I get on the list? So the first things I want to mention is, what is a LIDA, Local Intellectual Developmental Disability Authority? It's a long mouthful. So a LIDA, L-I-D-D-A. Your local authority is where you're going to get on some of these lists. But sometimes people are confused. They'll say, I'm on all the lists, or I have my child on all of the lists, when they've actually called the local authority and they actually have their child on the list for HCS, Texas Home Living, and perhaps Community First Choice. So you're going to want to contact your local Intellectual Developmental Disability Authority to get on the list, also to check the status of your list. And so in this slide, we have a link, and this link is going to take you to a website where you're going to put in your zip code for where the individual lives, and it's going to tell you who your local authority is. It is by county. So first things first, Make sure you know who your local authority is. You know, Bluebonnet Trails is one up in your area. I mean, there's several of them, but it just depends on what county you're in, on where you fall. The other thing to know is, let's just say, for instance, let's just say the LITA is Bluebonnet Trails, and you put your child on the list 5 years ago in Bluebonnet Trails, and then later you moved from the San Antonio area to Houston, and now your local authority is not Bluebonnet Trails. It changes to the Houston Authority, which is going to be, it was formerly MHMR and is now referred to the Harris Center. So when you move, it is important to notify your current LITA and then notify the new one so they can get your case transferred. You do not lose your place in line. That is something that people want to know, is if I change counties and I have a new LITA, am I going to lose my place in line? And you absolutely will not lose your place in line. The other important thing for you to know is, you know, when people are saying, I have them on all the lists, but they had only called the LITA, if you do not call the 800 number, that's 1-877-438-5658. Again, that's 1-877-438-5658. That is the phone number for MDCP, CLAS, and DBMD. So you want to make sure that you actually have your child on those lists, as well as the HCS, Texas Home Living and Community First Choice. And for the 21 and over, we have a separate phone number yet again for the STAR Plus waivers. So this is how you're going to get on the list. This is how you will check to see your status. Oftentimes you will hear, kind of slowed down a little bit in COVID, but usually you'll hear from your local authority once a year, either by phone or by email. And it is important that you respond to them. If your email changes, if your phone number changes, if your address changes, even if you're still in the same county, you want to update your local authority with that information so they know how to get a hold of you. When they're reaching out, they want to know if you actually still want to be on the list. So it is important to answer them and respond. So someone asked for the phone number again. The MDCP, CLAS, and DBMD phone number is 1-877-438-5658. Okay, and just as a reminder for everybody that is out here today, again, we are recording, and you are going to get a copy of today's slides with all of the links, all the phone numbers, where to call, how to get on the list, so you don't have to take notes on everything that we're talking about today, because you're going to get the slides for your benefit as well. Okay, so something cool that happened last year, I'm actually pretty excited about this. There's a new way to look online to learn where your child is on the Texas Medicaid Waivers interest list. And you're going to follow these 5 easy steps. So it used to be, if you wanted to know where your child was on the list, you had to call your local authority, speak to a person who looked them up, and then manually told you where they were on the list. So the cool thing is now you can see where your child is on the list at yourtexasbenefits.com. This is the same for your Medicaid login. If your kid is already getting Medicaid, this is your same login for the Medicaid account. You can, if you don't have an account, you can absolutely create an account. Okay, so you're going to log in, and then from the Manage tab, you're going to click on the Interest List Manager. Through the quick links, they'll have an Interest List Manager. You're going to click right on that, and then basically click on the View Details, and then it's going to show you exactly what their number is on the list, where they are, and give you the information that you need there. So this is kind of a cool addition. It's nice to be able to do this from your computer, not have to call, leave a message for somebody, wait for somebody to call you back, or call 3 times to get the information. You can definitely get this on your own now. So we also had somebody, we'll go back to the 21 plus for the waiver phone number, the STAR Plus waiver. You'll get that in the slides that we put out there. And anybody in the chat box, if they captured that and want wants to put it in the chat box, the Star Plus waiver phone number she was looking for. So if you don't see all the waivers you've expected when you log into this, you're going to want to call. You're going to want to call that phone number for the class MVCP DVMD, and for the HCS Texas Home Living Yes Waiver Community First Choice. You're going to reach out to your local authority. There is a such thing where people thought that their kid was on all the lists, and they find out when they log in of, oh snap, I only had my kid on the class waiver. Oh snap, I only had him on the HCS list. So it's really, really important to just log in and check this out to see where you are. And don't beat yourself up about this because it is very confusing. And so if you find that you only had your child on one of the lists and needed to get them on the other, you can easily get them added. Again, the waiting list is long, but you can definitely get them added. So let's talk about crisis. So there is a crisis diversion slot for HCS. So if your loved one is in crisis, you can contact your local authority and tell them you would like to request an HCS crisis diversion waiver. And what a crisis diversion waiver, it's still the same HCS waiver, but it moves you from wherever you are in the waiting list to right now to getting the waiver. So let's talk about some examples of crisis. Some examples, and this topic could be broad as far as examples of crisis, but some examples of crisis could be that your loved one is a threat to themselves and others, and as a result of that, they are at risk of being placed outside the home. It could be a death of a parent. It could be a critical illness of a parent where the other parent that was providing caregiving services now can't provide the caregiving services that they once did because they're having to care for each other, and as a result, the person is at risk of being placed outside the home. It could be another family member. You yourself, as the parent, could have a parent yourself, mom or dad, that has critical care needs, and now you need to be providing caregiving services to your ailing parents, and it's taking away from the caregiving services that you can provide to your loved one with a disability, and as a result, they're at risk of being placed outside the home. So those are examples of crisis diversion. Now, the key thing to know with the HCS waiver is the HCS waiver does have a intellectual disability requirement of the IQ below 70. So the truth is that there are plenty of people that don't have an intellectual disability that have been in crisis, and it would be lovely if they could get a crisis diversion slot, but the only crisis diversion waivers that we have are the HCS waivers. So this will not be a good fit, and it won't work, and there's not a workaround or a what if or a one-off case. I mean, the requirements are pretty clear on the intellectual disability requirement for HCS, okay? The pre-admission screening and resident review, some of you may have heard like a crisis diversion and transition from nursing facilities or specialized services. You may have heard of a family getting a Medicaid waiver and HCS slot because they did an overnight or they did a weekend in a facility or a nursing home, and so then they were able to get that slot that way. So those are some other ways that maybe people have bypassed the list, and maybe they went into a facility, there was a hospitalization. As a result of the hospitalization, there needed to be some extended care for a little while. That can be another reason why they had the overnight stay, and maybe it was longer than just one overnight, but that is another way to go about doing that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about how do you get started with special needs planning. So first things first, you want to work with a special needs planner to help you formulate a plan. And as I mentioned at the beginning, our situation is specialized. When we have a loved one with a disability, our situation is specialized. You do want to work with a specialist. This is not a DIY project. I'm a fan of DIY projects, and there's a lot of things that we can do DIY on, but planning for special needs, your legal documents, those types of things are not something that you want to do yourself. So what I would say is when it comes to special needs advisors, There's about 260,000 financial advisors in the U.S. and less than 125 total, not 1,000, 125 have any background in special needs. So that is an important factor. And when it comes to having a background in special needs and why that's important is we want to preserve the eligibility for state and federally funded programs for our kids in the future. Even though they may not be qualifying now, maybe they're under age 18, things change when they turn 18, and that's important. As it relates to legal documents, I always say you want to work with, a specialized attorney. We have referrals for great attorneys that are nuanced and special needs all across the state. Another place you can look up is the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys. That's a good place that you can look up. But, I'm a fan of the moms Facebook groups too. A lot of the special needs Facebook groups, the shining stars rise to the top in the recommendations, and people have worked with other attorneys. So what I'm saying is your brother, the real estate attorney who can do the special needs trust for you, just say no. Your neighbor, the divorce attorney who can do your trust for you, just say no. You really want to work with a specialist. And we've seen a lot of documents through the years that were really wrong, that, they were just really wrong and they needed to be redone. Okay, so just be careful with that. It is also important when we're thinking about your legal documents, we recommend that they get looked at every 3 to 5 years. Updates, there's updates to the law. Laws change. So if you did, your trust 10 years ago, it is time to look at it. And one thing I will also say is I would venture a guess between 90 and 95% of people, including everybody on this today, either has no will or an outdated will, an outdated trust. And so I'm saying that to say there's no shame in that. It's not about looking back. It's about looking forward. But you're not alone. It's something that we have good intentions and we really want to get it done. And then it sits on the shelf and days turn into weeks and weeks to months. And before you know it, the years have slipped by. We've got some people that we see their documents and they have 3 other children that aren't even listed, right? Things like that. And so the other thing that I would say is it's really important when we're thinking about legal documents, it's really important to have intentional conversations with any aging family members, parents, any aging family members that you love in your life, because with those numbers, the way I talked about, it's a good possibility that their documents are either not in place or haven't been updated in many, many years. So a special needs planner, what we do, Consolidated Planning Group, we help you formulate the plan. I always say, they're the legal documents, they're the paper, the attorneys, we're the money. So they don't do what we do. We don't really do what they do, but we generally work together on things. And quite honestly, I don't think that you want an attorney or a financial advisor that is doing both, okay? So when it comes to planning for special needs, what we want you to do is gather all the planning documents necessary. So what am I talking about? Planning documents. Some of the things that we would gather is any legal documents that you already have in place, any information that you have on group benefits that you have through your employers, any benefits that you have purchased outside of your employers, such as life insurance, disability, long-term care, cancer plans, things like that. We will need statements like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, 401ks, 403bs, pensions, from current employers, past employers, etc., Social Security statements, and full earnings records. And I'm going to get to the why behind that in just a moment. We also recommend developing a letter of intent. I actually did a webinar on this just yesterday on what is a letter of intent and why you might need one. And think of a letter of intent as a family love letter. As parents, we have forgot more about our loved one with a disability than anybody will ever know. And if we are incapacitated or deceased, who is going to know this information? Oftentimes, even in a marriage, a great marriage, maybe one person is working and the other person is doing the caregiving services, handling all the appointments and those types of things. So sometimes, even in your own household, a spouse may not know what the caregiver knows. Okay, so the letter of intent is going to put all the details in there that we need to know if somebody was going to step into your shoes, if you couldn't, what we need to know: diagnosis, medication, religious preferences, you know, where they've been to school, if they're getting any state or federal benefits, if there are any programs. We also think when we're starting to think about special needs planning, is we want you to think about your vision and how you hope things will look, not only for your special needs child, but for you and your own retirement and your own future. When it comes to planning for a special needs loved one, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If we have a loved one that's going to have care needs the rest of their life, not just the rest of ours, your semblance of retirement may look a little bit different than someone who has neurotypical kids that go to college, they get married and sail off into the sunset. And we need to have some balance in there for some semblance of retirement of what you hoped for. So when it comes to how will your child's care be funded, one thing that we want to do, and some of the things that we've been talking about today, is preserving eligibility for state and federally funded programs. We're talking about SSI and Social Security. So SSI is a supplemental security income. It is for the indigent and disabled. That is what SSI is for. The 2024 number, as I mentioned earlier today, is $943 a month for SSI. So although you have a child with a disability, if they're under age 18, you may have applied for SSI before and got denied and felt very frustrated by that. And simply the reason they were denied may not be because they're not disabled. It's just simply you didn't meet the income and asset requirements. You had too much money. You had more than $2,000 in your name. The magic thing that happens when your child turns 18, and this is true even if they're under a full guardianship, even if they live in your household, even if you claim them on your tax return, is when they turn 18, when it comes to SSI and Medicaid, it's based off of their income and assets, not yours anymore. So although they haven't qualified for SSI all these years, they very well may once they turn 18. So for anybody that is listening in and their child is already getting SSI and Medicaid at this time, it is important to note that there is a redetermination that is necessary when they turn 18. You have to show that they're still in school. You have to, show that they're an adult with disabilities. So there is a redetermination, and it doesn't just sail on into adulthood. So Social Security is also known as Social Security Retirement. It's also known as SSDI, Social Security Disability. It would only make sense that an individual with a disability would qualify for SSDI. That would make sense, and that is not how it works, okay? SSDI is a system that we pay into. You have quarters. You have a Social Security statement, and it says how many quarters you have or have paid into. Our kids that haven't worked haven't paid into the Social Security disability system. So when you apply for SSI and Medicaid, at the same time, you don't always know this, but you also simultaneously apply for Social Security disability. And typically what happens is the first letter you're going to get is the denial for Social Security disability. And sometimes people are very upset about receiving this letter, like, how in the world did they say that my loved one is not disabled? What are they talking about? Well, actually, you're getting the denial letter, rightfully so. The child has not paid in, they are not fully insured, and they don't qualify for Social Security disability under their own record. But what that letter doesn't tell you is that they're still looking at your application for SSI, and that has not been denied. So just be aware that that's kind of how that works. And for people that want more details, we have many webinars on our Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel on applying for SSI, how and when, how the programs work, what to do, what not to do, how working affects SSI. We've got lots and lots of webinars on that topic. So another place that we can have money is in the Special Needs Trust. So there are basically two places that we can have money above and beyond the $2,000 that are the Medicaid guidelines. And just so you know, guys, That $2,000 limit hasn't changed in like 40 plus years, maybe even longer. And there has been some discussion about it being raised to 10,000 every year. Somebody says, I heard it was raised to 10,000. It is out there in Congress to approve that, but they have not approved it. It has not been approved yet, but there is talk about that, and we can only remain hopeful and optimistic that they will raise that asset limit, because clearly $2,000 isn't enough for anything. But the places that we can have money outside of your $2,000 is a special needs trust for said individual with a disability, or an ABLE account. An ABLE account is under the tax code 529A. You've probably heard frequently about 529Cs for college. A 529A is a similar account like a 529C, only it's specifically for an individual who has a disability, whose disability began prior to age 26. And that age in 2026 is actually going up to age 46. So if the disability occurred prior to age 46, come 2026, they can also have an ABLE account. But an ABLE account is tax-free growth, tax-free distributions, penalty-free distributions. If you distribute the money and it can be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, you can pay for it. It is one of the least restrictive accounts of how you can pay for things for an individual. Another thing on an ABLE account is you can contribute $18,000 per year and an additional $14,580 if the individual is working. So up to $14,580 additionally, but they would have had to earn that much. So if they only earned $10,000, then their additional amount would only be $10,000. So the ABLE account, the cool thing about an ABLE account is there is an SSI reduction for food and shelter. So if a person is not paying rent, they don't get the full $943 a month. So if you're on here and you're saying, hey, that's me, my child only gets $600 and some odd a month, that tells me that you probably need to submit a rent or a fair share agreement indicating that your child is paying rent, and that each month when their SSI comes in, you move $500 from that account to your account to pay to suffice for the rent. Another place that you can pay rent out of it is the ABLE account. And then there will not be a 1/3 reduction to SSI. Because SSI is designed to pay for food and shelter, if you do not have a rent or a fair share agreement in place with the Social Security Administration with your child, you will be getting a lower payment reduced by 1/3. So another place that we fund the care for our kids is through life insurance and other assets. I am a fan of keeping our assets nimble. You spend 25, 30 years building assets for your retirement that you're going to spend 25 to 35 years. It's kind of like, I call it stocking the pond. So for 25, 35 years, we work, we stock the pond. When we start to retire, then we start going fishing. We're going to pull out, our money. We want to keep our money nimble in retirement because that's a long time. And ultimately, as parents, we're the funder of our own retirement and the care of our loved one with a disability. But life insurance is a way that we leave money to the special needs trust for said individual for their benefit in the future. It's important to note, and I always like to note this, and anybody that attends all the time, you've heard me say this a million times, you're probably eye rolling right now, but it is really, really important that we don't name our loved one with a disability directly as a beneficiary. So for instance, if my kid's name is John Smith, I don't ever want to name John Smith as a beneficiary on anything I have: pension, life insurance, 401k, 403b. The right way to leave money to John Smith is to the special needs trust, the third-party special needs trust for the benefit of John Smith. That way, it will preserve the eligibility for these programs, SSI, Medicaid waivers. And one pro tip that I want to tell you here, it is really, really important that you have intentional conversations with your aging family members, any affluent family members that might leave an inheritance. They love their grandchild, they want to leave money, they want to help, they know you need help. Their financial advisor is not nuanced in special needs. The chances of that are very, very slim. So when they come in and they say, I love my little grandson, Johnny Smith, and I want to leave my money to him, they say, great, what's his name? And they make the beneficiary John Smith, and it messes everything up. So you need to have your loved ones know that the right way to leave money is to the third-party special needs trust. Once you have that special needs trust, you can give them the actual name of the special needs trust, the tax ID, and they can properly set up beneficiaries to that. What happens if they don't? If they don't, and they accidentally leave money directly to your child, oftentimes some of the attorneys that we work with, we call it an OOPS trust. It's a first-party special needs trust. There is a Medicaid payback with a first-party special needs trust. Oops, somebody left my child with a disability money, and if I don't get this into an account quickly, they're going to lose their eligibility for their Medicaid waiver, for Medicaid, for SSI. Then you're going to have a first-party special needs trust. It does have a Medicaid payback. A third-party special needs trust doesn't have a Medicaid payback. You can avoid the Medicaid payback on the special needs trust by setting things up properly on the front end yourself and having those intentional conversations with your loved ones. Okay. Does anybody have questions? Do we have any questions in the chat box?
There is just one in there right now.
Yes. Okay, go ahead. Tell me about it.
I'm a special ed teacher, and I tell my students' parents about hiring someone such as your agency to help with this because of how overwhelming this can be. They always ask, what is the cost of this service? Are you able to give a general cost at the end of the webinar?
For sure. We'll definitely talk about that. So thank you for that. And I think, you know, what my heart is, I have to tell you, these webinars were born out of my own frustration. I have 4 kids. I have 2 adults with disabilities. And I eat, sleep, and breathe this. This is what I do. And what I will tell you is transitioning into adulthood was bumpy. Things are hard. All of this stuff is hard. All the stuff you have to know, these ifs and buts, that, you know, the age 22 for Social Security and being covered under a parent's record, age 26 for an ABLE account, all these moving parts, and 18. And so that's really why all of these webinars and podcasts and things were born, is to put tools and resources in parents' hands so they can make informed decisions. All that information on the YouTube channel you can subscribe to for free and listen till your little heart is, you know, totally full. Lots and lots of information out there that we've learned along the way. So, you know, one of the things that we do when a family's working with us, first things first, we always offer a free personalized consultation. So it costs you nothing to kick the tires, to learn a little bit more about who is Consolidated Planning Group, how do we work, what are the doors that you can walk through with us. We are an advisory and consulting firm. We do have 3 doors that you can walk through. And what our goal is not to rain on any good planning that you've already done. We want to understand the planning that you already have in place. Oftentimes we will do a second opinion. People say, I've done a lot of stuff, but I want you to look at it and I want to make sure that it's right. Or I've done a lot of stuff and then there's more stuff I need to do and I want to pick up where I left off. And so truly, we really meet people where they are in their planning journey. Some people say, I'm embarrassed, I've not done anything, and I really need help. So no matter where you are, we can definitely help you. And we have various doors that people can walk through from a variety of prices that start as low as $12.50 and go as high as $37.50. So that's kind of a range. But part of the initial meeting, first of all, in an initial meeting, we want to understand a little bit more about the planning that you've done. What brings you to the meeting? We want to learn more about your loved one. And in some cases, some families have more than one child with a disability. We want to learn more about their functionality, what your hopes are for them, where they are right now. And because we know that when a kid is 18, where they are at 18 and where they're going to be at 29 are 2 different places, right? And so what we help people do is, what I say is, we help people hope for the best, but plan for the worst. When we plan for the worst and the best happens, guess what? You can retire earlier. Maybe you can buy that vacation home or that second home or the other things that you were thinking. Like I said, step away from work earlier. Maybe one person steps away from work. But what happens when, it's good to be hopeful and optimistic, and I totally am. But it's also at the point of being hopeful and optimistic and not doing any planning for the worst is unwise. When you are still in your working years, the cool thing is you still have time on your side, time to save more money, time to turn the knobs or make changes to your plan that are going to get you where you need to be in retirement and ultimately at the end of life. It is a big deal. Whether you're a single parent or you're married, you've got retirement. So if you're married, there's 2 retirements. When we have a loved one with a disability that may have care needs for the rest of their life, that's like a 3rd retirement because it's another 25 to 35 years after you're gone. So we help with all of those things. But the initial consultation, we're going to learn more about you, and we're going to share exactly who we are, how we work, the doors you can walk through, what the cost associated with that. Here at Consolidated Planning Group, we're very busy. We're not pushers. We're going to provide you that information, and following that meeting, we're going to give all of that information to you so you guys can kind of think things over and decide what might be a good fit for your family. Some of the other things that we keep in mind is who's going to care for your child when you're gone. Well, it's true some people have big, large families and they know they're going to have a successor caregiver. I have many families that come to us every year and say, this is it. There is nobody else. Then what happens? And so we help with discussions like that. We always suggest making careful considerations before naming siblings as a caregiver. We like the idea of an adult sibling being a successor trustee of the special needs trust that will help guide the care for the loved one with a disability, but not necessarily being in the driver's seat as the caregiver. And all I say to that is, I come to you as a parent myself, but think about what your hopes and dreams were when you were 18, 20, 21, 22. Did you want to get married, have children, have a house, go to college, have a meaningful career? Well, your kids do too. And all people have those hopes and dreams. And if their sibling is saddled up with being their full-time caregiver, sometimes it causes problems in their jobs, their employment, their financial situation, their relationships. And so we like a balance. Instead of an obligatory relationship that I have to do this, we want it to be a loving, friendly relationship is what we're hoping for. We suggest consider post-high school education and vocational options. We have complete webinars on our YouTube channel on the Texas Workforce Commission vocational rehab. If you're listening to this out of state, all states have vocational rehab. This is a program that starts as early as age 14 to help close the gaps on impediments to employment so that way your child can work. So I know that there are people that have kids that will absolutely never work. I get that. But we also have kids that can work, and vocational rehab will help close the gap on their impediments to employment. So check that one out. And then also we have a college planning for special needs, even kids that have an intellectual disability. There are a lot of programs out there, and they may not go straight from high school to a program like this. Maybe they do a transition program or an 18-plus program first, and then they go to some of these licenses or certificate programs or degree programs. But we do have webinars on that, talking about the various programs across the state and what to be thinking about on that as it relates to transition. We also suggest consider touring transition programs, partial care, full care, and residential communities. Waiting lists can be quite long, so we do want you to plan early on that. And so I'm not saying, hey, how can we put your loved one in a residential? What I want to say here is all parents think about this differently. We have some parents that we meet with and they say, my child is going to live with me until the day I die. And that's the way I want it. That's the way they want it. And that's totally fine. But other families want some balance in retirement. They want some autonomy for their child and for themselves. And they love some of these communities out there. For example, there's Marbridge, there's Brookwood, there's Daymark Living, 29 acres. Actually, folks, we have an entire webinar on all of the residential options across the state, and it's basically a speed dating, who, what, where, when, why, how much, who do we serve, and do we take Medicaid waivers is basically what those webinars are, to give you a taste of kind of the lay of the land. And we do have a lot of families that have adult children that are in some of these living communities, and their kids are quite happy. They have purpose, they have friends, they have community, some of them have jobs, and it's really quite fun. I've really had the opportunity to tour a lot of them, and what you'll see is that these parents didn't stick their kid anywhere. Their kid is happily there, and a lot of times the funny thing is they go to visit, and their child is saying, when are you going to leave? Or they come home for the weekend and they're asking when they can go back because they love it there. So that, that's just something to keep in mind. Some of the things that we want you to keep on the radar, we always keep this on the end of all of our slides, developing the special needs care plan, the future care cost estimates, that's where we come in. And we'll do small, medium, and large. How much do we need to fund the special needs trust? What if my child needs some care? What if they need full care? What if they are maybe going to live in a garage apartment or a tiny home on our property with an attendant? What does that look like? How much does that cost? We talked today about the Texas Waivers interest list, SSI, SSDI, understanding those differences and knowing when to apply, ABLE accounts. We talked about our beneficiary designations and how critically important it is to not name our special needs loved one as a direct beneficiary. Special needs trust and how to fund them. One thing that we didn't talk about, and I always like to bring this up, anybody that finds themselves in a divorce situation and they're A, getting child support, or B, paying child support, your loved one with a disability, that child support is going to need to be redirected to a first-party special needs trust before they turn 18, before applying for SSI. If you don't, the child support will be counted against them as income for SSI purposes. So first, you're going to have a first-party special needs trust, and you're going to need to work with an elder law attorney or special needs attorney on that to set that up. And then you'll also have to work with an attorney that can get the court order to redirect the child support to the first-party special needs trust. This is really important, and this is often forgotten, and people don't always know this. So guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, and in Texas and in some other states, they have what is called a supported decision-making agreement. We do have that in Texas. In Texas, when it comes to guardianship, well, first of all, you don't need guardianship prior to them turning 18. You already have it. Once they turn 18, careful consideration. The law says least restrictive, most appropriate for the ward, W-A-R-D, crazy name, but least restrictive, most appropriate for the individual. So there's guardianship, there's partial guardianship, and then of course the power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, supported decision-making agreement. Folks, if you're on here and you don't have a will, you don't have a power of attorney or healthcare power of attorney, you need to get one. I strongly suggest a power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney for your neurotypical kids that are 18 and off to college. It's important. If these kids have a mental health crisis and they haul them out of there to a mental health facility, you don't have this, they're not even going to tell you where they took them, okay? It's really important. If there's a car accident or things like that, so go ahead and get that power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney. Go ahead and have those intentional conversations with your aging parents on their documents. Don't wait for the stroke or the crisis to happen to realize we didn't have these in place after all. So all those things are important. And today you're going to get a copy of these slides. There's going to be a link for our upcoming webinars and the titles of all of them and what we'll be talking about in those. And so feel free to register for any of the upcoming webinars. We work on a collaborative team here at CPG. Again, we're nationally certified as Social Security advisors and members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We stand ready to help you when it comes to planning for your loved one. Again, whether it's picking up where you left off, whether it's getting started, whether you just really need a second opinion and kind of help moving your plan along, we're definitely ready to help you. This QR code here on the screen, you can schedule your free consultation. It'll take you to our calendar and you can schedule directly with us at a time that is convenient for you. So we have just a minute or two left. What are some of the additional questions that we have today?
So there's a few left, so I don't know if there's enough time. So I don't know if they can email you or not, but the next one up was, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but how do I go about opening a special need trust, and does it have to have substantial assets to do so?
No, you can fund a special needs trust with $5, and you open up that special needs trust with a special needs attorney. Happy to provide a referral on that, and you don't have to have substantial. We like people to keep their assets nimble in retirement and fund it upon their death.
Okay, the next one is, how much should food and shelter be in the agreement for SSI?
I use the number of 500, and it's never been wrong. You know, I've seen people do a little bit less. I've always used the number of $500 a month.
Okay. And then you said something about a specific application you stated that would need to be applied through SSI so that one special needs child would get more SSI to assist with caring for them at home. Do you have to ask for those, or they don't automatically offer that?
So SSI is just for food and shelter. So that's the $943 a month. So the SSI is a specific application. And just for everybody in the chat box too, there is a specific webinar on special needs trust and how to get started and what to do with that. And there is definitely a specific webinar on SSI, but SSI pays for food and shelter. It's designed to pay for food and shelter. So there is an application for SSI. But the Medicaid waivers that we started this conversation about is designed to waive off some of the cost of care of caring for an individual in home and community-based services. So that's what that would do. And getting on the Medicaid waivers interest list is going to help you in that department.
And then do you only provide services for those living in other states? Consolidated Planning Group is domiciled in Texas, and we actually work all across the United States. So it doesn't matter what state a person lives in, we can absolutely work with them. Okay? So whether they start in Texas, they've never been in Texas, they're never coming to Texas, it doesn't matter what state you are in. And we are familiar with the benefits and the various programs in other states as well. So thanks so much. Great questions. We went just a tiny bit over. Thanks for partnering with us today. It's certainly always our pleasure. Again, everybody's going to get an email with today's slides, all the links, all the phone numbers, the QR code to schedule with us directly. And if you have any additional questions that maybe you didn't put in the chat box, you didn't want to put out there, feel free to reach out to us directly, either by email at contact@cpgcares.net. You can call us at 281-690-1177. And we look forward to working with you. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.